Flashpoint show I'm going to be on later. This movie is now being live streamed. Dennis and Don, if you want to exchange contacts, although the great Eileen Proctor is with us and she can facilitate.
Yeah, please.
Together.
Yeah, I'm actually.
I think we're recording.
Okay, we're all recording. Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back with you for the Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call, the GREEP or GREE-GREE, number 139. We have been doing this since April of 2020, and a lot of history, a lot of water has passed under and over the dam. We're starting out with 36 people. It's great to have everybody with us. We have a tremendous honor today of having the former governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, with us. And Don has an incredible story to tell and some real direction to give us on into the future. Don, you're a tremendous inspiration. I'm sure you'll join Dennis Bernstein on his radio show to come and many others. We're just very honored to have you with us. We're also going to be joined by John Brakey, the great election protection activist in Arizona, who has a lot to share with you, Governor Siegelman. And so it's going to be an action-packed first hour. We're also joined by Vinny DiStefano, who with Wendy Lederman works very prominently on the Julian Assange case. And it's very powerful that you're all with us to get off to the start. John Brakey has just joined us from Arizona, and he has had, there are a few people in the world who have had as big an impact as John Brakey has had on our elections in this country. And it's a very great honor to be able to tie you two together. John, how you doing? Wave to the audience here. And the second hour, we're going to start talking, as we often do, about nuclear power and renewable energy. I had the great misfortune last Friday to actually see the Oliver Stone movie on nuclear power. It's even worse than you could imagine, an absolute abomination. And we're joined by Ron Leonard, one of the great godfathers of the renewable energy industry, a major player in solar and wind, and he will be talking with me and others about the energy situation in this country. We're also joined here by Emily Levy. Hi, Emily, the founder and leader of the Scrutineers Organization, which deals deeply in election protection and other such issues. So, and I want to say that we're joined by your fellow Alabaman, a native of Mobile, I believe, Ruth Strauss. Ruth, I'm going to unmute you. You are probably the only two people on the call from Alabama. Ruth, do you want to say hi to Governor Siegelman? Can we hear you, Ruth? All right, we'll get this squared away soon. So, Governor Siegelman, you were governor of Alabama at the turn of the century. You had a horrendous experience with Karl Rove and the so-called justice system that we'll get to in a couple of minutes. But before we start with you, I do want to introduce you to HEDY TRIPP in St. Cloud, Minnesota, at the other end of the country. HEDY is a great election activist and wants to give us a 3-minute report on a study being done on election rights. So Asian Americans in the 2022 midterm elections. HEDY, can you tell us what this is about, please?
Yes, and I will do that very quickly. This is a new report, an insight into how Asian Americans voted in the 2022 midterm. It was done by AAJC, that's Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and that is based in Washington, D.C. Now, first of all, as most of you know, the term Asian Americans just lumps together everybody from, more than 50 countries that are in Asia, and probably thousands of dialects and languages and cultures. Sluggo, you have firsthand in your travels, especially in Indonesia, of how that is. And I am originally from the island of Singapore. but here in America, Asians are lumped together. I'm going to jump to a few slides. Let's see, 4. They did the survey from November to December 2022 with 2,800 Asian Americans. And what I'm doing today for you is just to give you just a little window into how this is important as you share, as you support Asian groups who work in increasing voting in these communities. Now, Mike Hirsch has the original slides, the presentation, and the report. So if you need more details, please go to him. I'm gonna go to slide 10. One of the issues was that 1 in 6 felt threatened when they voted. And the highest were Asian American Indians, and those aged from 18 to 30, and those with high school degrees or less. So keep that in mind. Asian Indians, probably because they were targeted during 9/11. Now, 2 in 3 voted early and did absentee voting. This is a little bit difficult to try and find the slides for you. Let me go to slide 30. Slide
You have to
28.
remember, Hetty, we're on the radio, so you want to be very
Correct.
explicit about
Yes,
what you're showing us.
right. So these are the top reasons for voting early and absentee. And this is coming from these Asian Americans that were surveyed. Long lines, limited hours during election day, COVID, of course, flexibility of being absent, election day scheduling conflicts, so that is included. Harassment and intimidation, as I said, 1 in 6 feel threatened. And then again, 1 in 10 unsure of where to vote.
So intimidation was clearly a
Correct.
significant factor. 12% of people being intimidated. Virtually every election in this country is decided by less than 12%. So clearly it can have an impact on the elections.
Correct.
Okay.
Let me do 2 more slides. 37. I'm going forward to slide 37. Sorry about this. 5, 6, and 7. All right. And here is, I think, the most important in terms of working with Asian American communities is in-language assistance. Again, you know, there's so many languages and cultures that you have to reach Asian Americans through their own language. Notice that naturalized voters slightly likelier than US voters to say that the language assistant is helpful because they're still working with their own language. And that makes sense, right, Sluggo?
Yes, yes. And in fact, this is a significant factor in 2024. In 2004 in Ohio, many precincts, which were majority Spanish speaking, were not provided with Spanish speaking assistance as was required by law. And this was a major complaint about the legitimacy of the election in Ohio 2004, is that Spanish-speaking districts were not supplied with poll workers who could speak Spanish. So obviously this carries over to the Asian language community as well.
And that's just one language, right? And this is has many other levels. And then I want to just go to the last slide. Sorry about this. And again, you can contact Mike Hirsch to find out the details in this. All right, so here is the report's conclusion. To be able to have access to the vote, this is what Asian Americans were saying, universal, no excuse, absentee voting must be available to them. Older people vote by mail. They do want to do early voting because, again, of that intimidation and providing language access. Also, they were saying there was a lot of what they felt was disinformation. They were wanting more accurate information on candidates and also better candidates. That makes sense too.
Well, you know what Mark
Community-
Twain said?
Okay,
If,
what?
if God had wanted us to have elections, he would have provided us with candidates.
Community education and engagement. This is interesting. They were getting most of their information through Facebook and YouTube. So
God.
these are the two pieces that they were getting that. So that's basically it. Very fast struggle for you, but the details can be obtained from Mike.
Thank you very much, HEDY TRIPP. I think that this information actually, though it comes from the Asian American community, is pretty generic and really applies to all elections. So we will use that. Thank you. George Ripley has asked if there's a link to the report. Maybe you can put it in the chat. That would be great.
I will leave that to Mike to do that.
Okay, Mike and Steve, if you can put the link to that report in the chat. Thank you, HEDY. That was very helpful. We really appreciate it. Okay, and it's always great to see you, La. Okay, thank you so much. Governor Siegelman, we're gonna welcome you back. I want to have the honors done by a native Alabaman. Is it Alabaman or Alabamian? Ruth Strauss, you want to say hi to your former governor here?
I do. And I also want to say that when my high school girlfriends got together for lunch last Christmas, we were at the Bluegill, which is a seafood dive. And right at the register, there was a T-shirt in a glass box that said "Free Don Siegelman." I just thought it was great. And I'll make a comment at the end too about where people can find more information, Scott Horton articles. Thank you.
And Ruth, you grew up in Mobile, right? Okay, all right. You're from Mobile?
Got it.
I am. Yeah, we both are. Yes.
You're from Mobile too. Well, maybe you knew the Ruth Strauss family in Mobile. Okay, so Don Siegelman, you are the former governor of Alabama. You have an incredible story to tell. Can you give us a sort of a thumbnail of the picture of your career and what was done to you and what you want to tell us about today?
Well, it's, I'd rather not necessarily dwell on my case, although I'll go through it real quickly. I was Secretary of State, Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor. I had landed 5 automobile plants. We had secured the largest single land purchase to protect the Mobile Delta. I had been touted by the Kiplinger letter as a dark horse candidate to run against George W. Bush in 2004. All I needed to do was win re-election, and that's when Alabama, little known as being important in national elections, became a political battleground. I was investigated by Karl Rove's client, the state attorney general. I was investigated by the U.S. attorney, who was vetted by Rove and appointed by Bush, who was married to my Republican opponents. Her husband was my Republican opponent's campaign manager. The U.S. attorney's husband was my Republican opponent's campaign manager. The federal judge that was overseeing my case was the trial judge, was one with whom I'd had political battles in the past. He, of course, was vetted by Rove and appointed by Bush as well. I was indicted for something 113 former state attorneys general said was never a crime in the United States. When I was convicted, I realized that our system was flawed, that it could be gamed. At that moment, I reflected on the people whose execution dates I had set as Attorney General. And I recalled some of the people who had applied for clemency while I was governor. And I asked God, you know, in my own way, to forgive me if I had made a mistake. I'm not even sure what I meant by that at that time. But, you know, after delving into what had happened, I knew why and who was behind it, but I didn't know how I could be convicted of something that was only contrived in the minds of the prosecutors. I found that prosecutors get 99% of the indictments they seek. Across the board, state, local, federal, on average, they get 99% of the indictments they seek. This happens because in 1976, during the cry for war on crime and the war on drugs, the Supreme Court responded with by giving prosecutors what amounts to total immunity from civil liability, meaning that they can present false evidence, false testimony, withhold exculpatory evidence without fear of being held accountable civilly. The Brennan Center did a study showing that in 1976, our incarceration rate hovered around 200,000 and then skyrocketed to 1.6 million down the road. The reason prosecutors can get 99% of the indictments they seek is, one, the Supreme Court decision in 1976 giving them total immunity. Congress gave them immunity through the Federal Tort Claims Act, and grand juries are a secret proceeding where there is no lawyer for the victim or for the target. There is no judge to oversee what the prosecutors are doing, so they have free rein to do whatever they want to get the outcome they want out of a grand jury. It's interesting to note that while prosecutors get 99% of the indictments they want, that percentage drops precipitously when white police officers kill a black motorist through the use of excessive force. So we need to think about how we can bring this under control. One, you know, the Supreme Court is not likely to act to reverse what they did in 1976. So it's going to be up to Congress and state leaders to make changes in our laws to restrict the power and the abuse of power by prosecutors. The acceptance of prosecutorial immunity, I think, is underscored by the argument that was made by President Obama's Solicitor General, Elena Kagan, on January the 4th, 2010, when she had her deputy argue to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I quote, that U.S. citizens do not have a constitutional right not to be framed. U.S. citizens do not have a constitutional right not to be framed. That story was broken by David Savage, the legal correspondent of the Los Angeles Times, on January the 5th, 2010. To bring this home, I wanted to go back to voting rights, and in the America's history on voting rights started out in a not such a good way. I mean, we restricted the rights of Native Americans, women, and blacks, and of course it got worse after the Civil War, when Jim Crow laws and constitutions were put in place, and then the Ku Klux Klan vigilantes took to the streets and killed untold thousands of lynched, untold thousands of Black women, men, and children. The effort to reverse that came to light, I think, in large part because of the Blacks in Selma, Alabama, under the leadership of John Lewis and Dr. King, who took to the streets to ensure that the story of the need, the fight for voting rights had to be told. They understood that all of our duties and responsibilities are decided by people whom we elect. So the right to vote, in their judgment, was the most precious right. And that movement that started in Selma marched on across the Edmund Pettus Bridge to the steps of the state capitol, where Dr. King said that they would keep marching until George Wallace and the racists and race baiters, trembled away. They marched on to the United States Congress, where the Voting Rights Act was passed, and then to the chambers of the Supreme Court, where one vote, one person, one vote ruling was decreed. It's interesting because Dr. King, during that time in 1968, said that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. He said it was long, but it bends towards justice. Dr. King died in 1968, and we're still waiting for the arc of the moral universe to bend enough so that we can get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed. George Floyd died a couple of years ago, but we're still waiting for the arc of the moral universe to bend enough to pressure Congress to pass restraints against the excessive use of force. And to show you how all of this comes together, I wrote a piece for the Washington Post that was published last week. Alabama has 166 people on death row. 146 of those should not be on death row. Let me explain. 115 of those, 115 of the 146 are there because they were sentenced by non-unanimous juries. Non-unanimous juries is something that was contrived in the 1870s when Black folks first became eligible to serve on juries. Whites decided that they could no longer have unanimous juries because it meant that a single Black juror could prevent someone from being executed. So non-unanimous juries grew out of the old Jim Crow era. Yet in Alabama today, we have 115 people on death row who were sentenced by non-unanimous juries. Secondly, we have 31 people on death row based on what's called judicial overrides. That means where the jury decided life without parole, but the judge decided, no, I'm going to go ahead and kill you anyway. Alabama outlawed judicial overrides in 2017, yet we still have people on death row waiting to be executed under a process that is not legal in any state in the country, including Alabama. It makes absolutely no sense. Again, how do we focus attention and bring change? The Equal Justice Initiative did a study that showed that judicial overrides hovered around 7% in non-election years, but in election years, when judges in Alabama ran for election, judicial overrides jumped to 30%. I think that says it all about judicial overrides. The Death Penalty Information Center did a study in February of 2021 that studied executions in the United States since 1976. And they concluded that for every 8 people executed, 8.3 people executed, 1 person was exonerated, which means that if you look at the statistics, that means we've been getting it wrong about 12% of the time. You know, whether you believe in the death penalty or not, if you believe that the death penalty is a deterrent, I think we can all agree that if we're going to execute people, we ought to at least be trying to execute the person who actually committed the crime. The Death Penalty Information Center went on to, in their study, to show that of the people exonerated from death row, 80% were exonerated because of prosecutorial or police misconduct. And of those people exonerated for prosecutorial or police misconduct, nearly 90%, I think it was 87.9 or 89.7%, were Black people. So that, again, it says that prosecutors were using false evidence, false testimony, or withholding exculpatory evidence to target Black people for murders they did not commit. In 2010, the case that was argued to the Supreme Court involved 2 young Black teenagers who were targeted by police investigators because they did not want to go down a trail that led them to a white suspect. They convinced a young Black man whom they had picked up at a used car lot or someplace, and they threatened him with prosecution if he did not point the finger at these 2 Black teenagers. These 2 people spent 25 years in prison for a crime they clearly did not commit. With that, let me conclude by saying I ran for governor because I believe that every child, regardless of where they were born or to whom, every child ought to have the right to reach their God-given potential through education. That means universal early learning. That means offering free college to any kid that stays in school and stays out of trouble and makes their grades. I don't believe that the 2020 election was decided because people went to bed at night worrying about Donald Trump. I think they went to bed at night worrying about how they were going to pay their bills, how their parents were going to live, whether their parents and grandparents were going to have enough money for food, for shelter, or to pay their medical expenses. We live in the richest country in the world. I think we should all agree, I think, that healthcare should be a right, not a privilege, that everyone, regardless, no one should go to bed homeless or hungry or without healthcare, not those in prison, not the disadvantaged, and not the poor. We voted for a president who believes in justice, who believes in social justice, equal justice, racial justice, environmental justice, and in criminal justice reform. Clearly, something is wrong when we have nearly 2 million people incarcerated in this country. Many of them, most of them, in fact, enter prison without any job skills and leave the same way. We have got to turn our prison system right side up. From the days of the cries for a war on crime and a war on drugs, there was one focus, and that was to put people in prison and keep them off the streets. It was a system for warehousing, not for rehabilitation, not for education, not to give them social skills or job skills. We have got to ensure that beginning on day one, those people that we lock up, look, prisons may not be the best place for us to reverse or change behavior, but it's our last best chance to do that. Secondly, we've got to repeal the immunity in the Federal Tort Claims Act. And I think we need to give serious thought to putting a lawyer for the victim of the use of excessive force by police in a grand jury. Let me ask this question to those listening. How many of you believe that George Zimmerman would have been set free in the Trayvon Martin case if Benjamin Crump had been sitting in the grand jury as a check on truth to what the prosecutor was presenting against George Floyd? The second point I want to make is grand jurors, unlike juries for civil and criminal trials, grand jurors are not voir dire. They're not questioned about their prejudices. For all we know, the grand jurors in the Breonna Taylor case, the grand jurors might have been related to the police or members of the Klan themselves, because no one was allowed to ask them the serious questions that would have ensured that they were fair and impartial. So we need to press Congress and state legislators to institute a process where grand jurors are questioned. And in my view, there ought to be a lawyer present for the target and for the victim, if it's a victim of the use of excessive force, so we can have a check on truth of what the prosecutors are presenting in grand juries. Let me conclude by saying, I believe that this country can become whatever it is that we want it to be and what it should be. But it starts with the right to vote. The right to vote today is under attack in the capital of Montgomery, Alabama. They're about to pass a bill that would make it a criminal offense for an employer to hand a worker an application for an absentee ballot. Instead of making it easier to vote, we are doing everything we can to make it more difficult, which means that the job for us is even that much harder. I believe that change will come for the better. That arc of the moral universe will bend toward justice when we get out and work hard enough and long enough to bend the arc so that we can elect people to public office who will make this state, all states in our country, everything that we know it can and should be. That's I'm sorry, I got carried away, but thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Governor Siegelman. You're an inspiration and a truly great role model. I know you endured tremendous injustice in opposing Karl Rove. We had our own experiences with Karl Rove in Ohio 2004, same time he was going after you. And I'm not going to press you, but if you want to explain what you went through at some point, that I'm sure we would all welcome it. But you have an op-ed. Eileen sent me the link to your op-ed on the death penalty. I noticed you were joined in your opposition to the death penalty by another former governor of Alabama. Is that right?
Yes. Robert Bentley is a Republican, and I took the draft down to him, and he was more than happy to sign on. And you know, I live in a Republican state. That's the House and Senate is dominated by Republicans, and we have a Republican governor. So it was good to have a Republican former governor, Robert Bentley, join me in this editorial. We're fighting an uphill battle, but I think if you believe what Dr. King said, we have to hope that the arc of the moral universe will bend toward justice in the case of those on death row in Alabama.
Well, it always astounds me how people who claim to be pro-life can turn around and support the death penalty. I mean, we are 100% certain that the death penalty results in the death of innocent people. There's simply no doubt about that. And I won't go further. I mean, it's very clear what we're saying.
Let me just remark on that one point. And while I was Attorney General, I was able to get one person off of death row. We were able to find exculpatory evidence, and His name was Johnny Harris. And I had an occasion to spend a few minutes with him just a few years ago, and it was very touching. It was a very emotional and powerful encounter that we had. But while I was governor in the year 2000, there was an execution. I had after becoming more aware of the power of prosecutors and their ability to withhold exculpatory evidence, I was able to work with some interns from Georgetown and from other parts of the country to study the cases that came before me as governor. And now, 23 years later, after this execution that occurred in 2000, I believe that the person who was executed was wrongfully charged, wrongfully convicted, and wrongfully executed. It became clear over the 23 years, evidence started to emerge. The evidence wasn't there when I was governor, but over the last 23 years, evidence started to emerge that the prosecutor withheld exculpatory evidence. So this man, Freddie Lee Wright, would probably have been convicted, but he certainly would not have been convicted of capital murder had the prosecution played fair.
Boy, that's something else. I do want to say, if I read it correctly, I thought I saw, and somebody can correct me, a news story today saying the Governor DeSantis of Florida wants to allow the death penalty in jury verdicts that are 8-4.
That's right.
In
Yeah.
other words,
Did
did I read that right?
Yes. Yeah. I call him Governor Ron DeSenseless, but anyway.
Well, you're better than Trump with that one. That's good.
He is, well, thank you. In his effort to be tough on crime, he joined Alabama in being the only state, as far as I know, and we've studied this, we can't find any other state that allows people to be sentenced to death based on a non-unanimous jury recommendation. Alabama has a 10-2 jury vote for a death sentence, which is, again, is a relic of the Jim Crow era. I mean, we're living in 2023, for goodness sakes, and we're still using a method that was devised in the minds of racists after the Civil War, so it would make it easier for them to kill people.
Man, it's just really earth-shattering. We have Bruce Strauss wants to say another word to you from Alabama, and then I want to go to John Brakey in Arizona. I want to make sure that you know each other. Ruth, go ahead, and then John Brakey, please.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that, Don, you're extremely principled because you did not mention at all the horror story that you went through. And people really should go back and research Scott Horton, not the one that does anti-war, but the professor international law at Columbia. And he did a series of articles in Harper's. And it really reads like, unfortunately, a mystery thriller, except the victim is Don. The other thing that's amazing is, as you know, everybody here knows that the Supreme Court ruled against the people in Alabama who surprisingly wanted to get rid of gerrymandering to get another Black district to be represented. So the Supreme Court has not, helped that situation. And finally, Karl Rove ended up being, I believe, president of University of Texas. So I do not want to smoke what they were smoking when they made that decision. Anyway, thank you so much, Don.
Yes, and we could do a couple of shows on Karl Rove, but we won't. And Don, when people should know your story if,
Well, let me just mention the, of course, I wrote a book. It's called Stealing Our Democracy. It's a nonfiction. I named Karl Rove. I named a sitting judge on the 11th Circuit, who was Karl Rove's political client, then the Attorney General of Alabama. I named the U.S. attorney and explained exactly how they were conflicted. But the good part about the nonfiction is if it's true, you can print it. Well, I haven't been served in 2 years with any kind of notice that they objected to anything I said. So I would encourage people, if you're interested in my story, you can buy the book, or I really like the Audible book because I do it. It's my own voice. Amazon offered, people to read it for me, but I wanted to read it myself. So, and the other thing, there was a documentary done by an independent filmmaker. It's a lot shorter than my Audible book. Audible book is about 12 hours, but the documentary is about an hour and a half. And it's entitled Atticus versus the Architect. And I think it's still available on Amazon for like $3. So Atticus versus the Architect, or Stealing Our Democracy. And you can, occasionally I'll say something worth listening to. So if you want to follow me, you can do that at Don Siegelman.
wow,
there.
okay, Steve Caruso has graciously put up Stealing Our Democracy. I will definitely get it. And we're really grateful to you, Don, for your incredible courage. We have had someone on with a parallel story, Steve Donziger. I don't know if Steve is with us today, but I don't know if you're familiar with Steve Donziger's.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a terrible story. I mean,
Yeah, he's you guys are unfortunately have been in similar situations. I want to introduce you to, we'll call on Sue and Dennis. Well, let me get Dennis in a minute, then we're going to do John Brakey. I know, Dennis, you might have to run for your show. So can you introduce yourself to Don and make sure you get him on flashpoints? Dennis Bernstein, go ahead. Are you unmuted? Let's unmute you. Always frustrating. Oh, there you go.
I'm unmuted.
Dennis, are you
Hi,
good?
Don. This is John Brakey.
I got it.
In
Sorry.
2008. Am I going on the wrong time? Okay.
Wait, yeah, let me get Dennis on first.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Dennis usually has to run to his show. I'm gonna be on later too. Go ahead.
I think you got me now. Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Terrific. Governor, thank you for the amazing work you've done. It's a lot of courage. I've spent a lot of years investigating sort of the serious kind of voter fraud where Black people throughout the South lose their right to vote. They try and report that they've been their church has been burned, and it turns into an investigation of how it wasn't actually their church, but they were committing voter fraud, and so they had a fight with the next church over the way, all the kinds of stories to avoid really giving people the right to vote. Now I'm watching, and I really wonder what you think about this. The way in which, for instance, in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Selma, Alabama, and we know that the core of the Black community, the power is in the city, and the white people control the state governments. And it does seem now that there's a new movement to usurp the power of the cities, of Black people in the cities, so that, for instance, I mean, in Jackson, it turns into a battle to have clean drinking water.
Don, do you want to comment on that? Dennis, by the way, as I mentioned, is the host of the Flashpoint show, which is on at 5 o'clock Pacific time in Berkeley, and it's syndicated nationwide. And I'll be Dennis's guest this evening, and I'm sure I'll have you on at another time. You want to comment on it? And then we'll go to John.
Well, Dennis, yeah, you're on the right track, of course. And it makes it more difficult when you're in a red state where most of the white people who are in power are Republicans, and they have very little contact with people in the inner city or in rural Alabama, for example. So there is very little empathy or political reason for the majority of people in the House and Senate in Alabama for them to have an interest in what is going on in these smaller, particularly rural cities. And they are struggling, and they struggle with healthcare issues, and they of course struggle with having the resources to provide a decent education. So yeah, you're right. I encourage you and applaud you for what you're doing.
Well, be
Thank
sure
you.
and
Thank you.
exchange your contacts with Dennis so he can have you on, Don. He's a great, and very important radio host. I want to, Sue and Wendy and Mary will get to you in a couple minutes. I do want to, did invite John Brakey to come on. Governor John Brakey is one of our most important election protection activists. He's done tremendously powerful work in Arizona. And John, will you introduce yourself to the governor, please?
Well, absolutely. Governor, we've met before. It's an honor to see you again. I am glad that you're healthy, and I'm sorry for everything you went through. I remember exactly, because I've been doing this work now for 19 years, and your case is one of the cases that I investigated. And I had the opportunity to go to Alabama in the 2017 for the Roy Moore election, which was just an incredible story that we won a court case in the morning. And me and my lawyer, who is out of DC, he's Barack Obama's attorney, he's a major election expert across the country, Chris Sauter. We were driving from Alabama to another city to go somewhere, and we got a phone call that they had appealed our case. And they appealed it in like 6 hours and didn't even give us notice before they overturned it. And we were just blown away by the whole thing. And then at the very end, Roy Moore was upset because they did do that, because what we were trying to do and what I do is that our whole country's gone digital. And these machines don't count the ballot, they count the picture. And to make a long story short, Arizona, hopefully, even though our bill got vetoed by the governor, and that we will have elections in my state that 2 days after the canvass, a precinct committee man or anybody can download a cast vote record for their precinct and then sit there and analyze. And then afterwards, after everything adds up really good, because, you know, we call this bill the big lie killer, we also call it the impunity buster. We take away anybody's impunity to steal by making the system transparent, trackable, publicly verified with a ballot library. And I hope to get your contact information after this, the show or whatever. I'm very close to Mimi Kennedy. You know, we have a forum that we're going to be doing Thursday night in Arizona that will be broadcast on Facebook, Twitter, and all over the place, where we will have some really dignitaries in our state, because, you know, my bill got vetoed, but believe it or not, I had 3 weeks to try to override it because they took a 3-week lead, which is really incredible. And you know, the Democrats, I was able, because I'm a Democrat lifelong, okay, but my business card says very clearly what I do is not about the right or left, it's all about right and wrong. And I have to be nonpartisan in my work. And it's interesting, you know, how things are working. But anyway, getting back to it, you're a role model for me, sir. Everything you've gone through and everything you've had to do, you know, I'm thankful that there's people out there like you who have heart, and you didn't come out bitter. You came out making change and still fighting. You're a brother from a different mother to me.
Well, who
Thank
knows?
you.
Maybe the same mother. You never know. I do want to say, I want to explain, Governor Siegelman, that John Brakey has pioneered the method of digital ballot images, where we rely on paper ballots, hand-marked paper ballots, which are then scanned into digital readers. And so the combination, because we in Ohio 2004 were victimized by Karl Rove in the presidential election. On election day, Karl Rove and George W. Bush in 2004 went one place. They went to Columbus to talk to and give instructions to the Secretary of State of Ohio as to how to deal with the 2004 election, which we are 100% was, shall we say, had major discrepancies. And it was a lot of it in 2004. Most of it really was done on touchscreen voting machines, which were very easily flipped. Now,
Well, you know,
and coming out of that, we went to paper ballots, hand-marked paper ballots with digital scanners, which was the predominant mode of election in 2020. So this is a very successful election protection movement, and John Brakey has been at the heart of it. So go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
well, I was just going to comment because I'm sure you probably remember that you know the Kiplinger letter said that all I needed to do to be this dark horse candidate in the fashion of Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton to break the Republican stronghold on the South was to win my reelection in 2002. And that's when Karl Rove's client, the Attorney General Bill Pryor, started his investigation. The night of the election, I won. I was declared by the Associated Press, CBS, NBC, all the networks as the winner. I went to bed. I was awakened about 4 o'clock in the morning by security telling me that they were stealing the election in this small county in Alabama. What happened, Karl Rove's deputy, her name was Kelly Robertson. I think her name at the time was Kelly Kimbrough, but she's still around. She was the White House deputy for Karl Rove. She was in Alabama overseeing and doing Karl Rove's work and was sitting at the desk with the Republican Party chairman when the elections results were posted showing that I was going to win the election. They then called the probate judge, and within 4 minutes, after the polls had closed, the poll workers and watchers had left, the media had left the courthouse. 4 minutes later, a new set of returns were posted with 6,000 of my votes being mysteriously vanished. What was a telltale sign of voter fraud was that not a single down ballot race, not the lieutenant governor, state treasurer, auditor, U.S. senator, no other race was impacted by a single vote. But my total I had lost by a little over six. I mean, they had subtracted a little over 6,000 votes, which swung the election to my Republican opponent. I asked for a hand recount of only one precinct. And the Attorney General, Karl Rove's client, came in, seized the ballots, seized the cassette tapes, seized the scanners, and took everything to Montgomery. And none of that has been seen since. They then illegally certified my Republican opponent as the winner of the 2002 election. I say illegally. I believe that if we had had a recount, I would have won that election and the story would have been different. But that's when my trouble began, because I told them at that point, okay, you've got me in a sort of a catch-22, because Alabama law said that you cannot contest an election unless you can prove that there were enough illegal votes cast or enough legal votes not counted to make a difference in the outcome. Well, I couldn't do either of those because the Attorney General had seized the ballots and wouldn't give them to us. So I said, okay, I can't contest the election because you stole it. And I'm going to come back and fight again another day. And that's when the heat started being turned up. And I was convicted of something that never, never happened. So anyway.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. I want to say very quickly, we have 70 people on the call. We are ending the first hour of those of you listening in on Progressive Radio Network on Thursday evening. We're going to switch over now. The second hour will not be on the radio there. You can come to electionprotection2024.org, electionprotection2024.org to see the continuation of this discussion, as you're probably going to be leaving PRN right now. I want to stay with you, Don Siegelman. Sue Dorfman has a hand that wants to ask you a question, then Wendy and Mary. Sue Dorfman, go ahead, please. Let's get you unmuted.
Yes, Governor. My question is how do we get, or how do you think the best way of getting attention paid to states such as Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas in terms of the implications of what is happening in terms of voting rights in those states? And parenthetically, I'm wondering if you could just weigh in a minute or two about what you think of the current Mississippi governor's race.
Well, I really don't know anything about the Mississippi governor's race. I'm gonna have to leave that to people in Mississippi to educate me. But the only thing I know is either we start, reinventing what Dr. King and Fred Shuttlesworth and John Lewis were doing. There was an old saying back in those days, raise hell and go to jail. That's what they did to get attention to the fact that, they were not being allowed to register and vote. Now, I think we're at instead of being in a catch-22, I think, again, we just have to work longer and harder and smarter, perhaps. But we have got to turn out. We've got to turn out, every single vote we can to elect good people to public office, so that we can make the changes that we all want to see made. Starting with, getting the John Lewis voting rights bill passed.
Boy, it's amazing what you're up against. Okay, Wendy, and then Jeffrey will give you a quick question, and Mary. Wendy Liederman in Florida.
Thank you, Harvey. And thank you so much, Governor. That was really just a profound presentation. I mean, really, almost brought me to tears in some parts there, because the suffering is so real. We think of it in abstract concepts, but people are rotting in jail for no reason and spend their lives and lose everything. I'm in Florida, so that kind of says a lot. My first it says it all. My first election was the Bush election, where I was watching the local news say that Gore won Dade County, and then a half an hour later the national news is saying otherwise. So I was kind of radicalized then. What's happening now, just speaking about the lowering the unanimous vote for juries to be able to execute people. There's also another bill that just passed that protects cops from excessive force. They can't be prosecuted for it. Basically, they'd get 180 days written notice before any kind of can't think of the word, but disciplinary action, any a defamation. So it's really frightening. You have to be 30 feet away from the police to be able to film them. And what's even more terrifying is that DeSantis is now going for $100 million private police force to support the National Guard. They would have all the toys of the military. They would have arrest powers. They would be trained and supported by Israeli private forces. It'd be I think it's 1,500 volunteers. So I could just see the Proud Boys all lining up, and it can be used for pretty much anything he would want to do. So I'm just imagining these people at the polling places, guarding polling places. We saw all the people get arrested for voting last year. So I I'm inspired by everything that you're saying and just kind of sharing this information. I don't know if I really have a specific question, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. And I just really want to applaud you and just tell you to keep doing what you're doing. Because I mean, you've just such an incredible way of presenting this information, and you apologized for getting intense, but I really appreciate that you did. And I just hope you keep at it. Thank you so much.
Well, you know, Florida is lucky to have you there. You know, when I was in prison, I was watching the 2016 election beginning to rev up, and it was late at night. It was around 10 o'clock, and I was watching the only thing we could watch was Fox News. That occasionally we could watch CNN, but there was a young man sitting back to my right, and I knew he had a Confederate flag tattoo, and Donald Trump was on, and he said this other inmate said something. He said, and I said, "Well, I'm sorry. What did you say?" He said, you know, now we have one of our own. Now we have one of our own. He was, and, you know, Donald Trump, you know, I never thought, being from Alabama, I thought that, you know, after George Wallace raised the Confederate flag over the Capitol as a slap in the face to Robert Kennedy when he was coming to Alabama, and just 3 months later, you know, the Ku Klux Klan being emboldened by that, blew up the 16th Street Baptist Church, killing those 4 little girls. You know, I never thought anybody could outdo George Wallace. But then, you know, then we had the emergence of Donald Trump, who was slow to move away from the endorsement of David Duke, slow to move away from the Confederate flag, who then came in to rally around the right wing at Charlotte when, you know, the young lady was killed. And, you know, and now we have, you know, I keep thinking about Dr. King's statement about the arc of the moral universe, and, you know, thinking about it leading to positive change. But with the emergence of clones of Donald Trump, like DeSantis, we cannot take change for the better for granted. That's why I keep coming back to, you know, we don't need to complain about it. We need to gear up and fight this. We have got to work again longer and harder and smarter and get out more people in order to ensure that good people are elected to public office.
Absolutely. And just, and the press, you know, not be criminalized and suppressed. And like Sue brought up, you know, just even uplifting independent media, just to be able, you know, JFK said that there's a reason that the press is the only business that's protected by the Constitution. It's because without scrutiny, then, you know, the republic can't thrive. And so it is really important. And you do make the point of just how fragile that goodness is. And it's something we have to constantly be vigilant of. And I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Well, along that line, I'm going to ask Mary, Justin, and Jeffrey to hold on a bit, because we do have an invited guest. Vinny DeStefano, Governor, is here, who has been working on the Julian Assange case. And there is a new development there, which has people scratching their heads about, I do want to mention, by the way, we also have a great crusader with us. Tatanka Bricka is with us from the Romero Institute in California, who works with Danny Sheehan, one of the great lawyers on cases like yours. I think you and Tatanka should be in touch, and you should also be in touch with Danny Sheehan. I do want to introduce Vinny. I think he's been with us before, but I'm sure you're interested, Don, in the Julian Assange case, and there was news this past week that the FBI is reopening some kind of investigation. I have no idea what that could possibly mean. Vinny, could you talk to Don and the rest of us a bit about what's going on with the Assange case?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much once again, Harvey, for allowing me to participate here. And what a great program. And Governor Siegelman, you are one of my true heroes. I've been following your case from the get-go. So you're incredible. The situation with the FBI reopening its case, I spoke to Margaret Kunstler a short while ago. And she told me, she says, it might not even be a reopening of the case. It may be a continuation of the investigation. However, there are three things that it might purport to be. The first and the most likely is the case against Julian Assange is incredibly weak. And they are looking for ways that they can strengthen the case, and that might be the reason for either continuation or reinstituting the investigation. Another vastly less likely possibility is it might be that the Biden administration is finally, sanely looking for a way out of this nightmare. The last thing in the world they want is to have the case tried in the Eastern District Court of Virginia, which would open up a huge can of worms for the Biden administration and might be incredibly embarrassing. But as I said, the third option is this just may be a continuation of the investigation. However, there were a couple of things that occurred this weekend simultaneously with that news. The first was Julian's Australian lawyer had discussed the possibility of using the, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank at this. It's a plea that David Hicks, an Australian citizen who was imprisoned in Guantanamo, the Alford plea. And what it allows you to do is to plead guilty to the charges and yet maintain your innocence. And the reason you're capable of maintaining your innocence is that if you look at the case against you, whether you're guilty or not, there is a high likelihood that you will be found guilty. So it allows you to proceed with your case, maintain your innocence. And in the case of David Hicks, he ultimately had his case overturned. The likelihood that Julian would be able to do this is very low. Unless, of course, and this goes back to what the FBI is doing, unless, of course, they alter the charges against him and provide him a lesser offense that he could plead guilty, go free, maintain his innocence, and hopefully get the charges dropped. And so if it sounds confusing, Harvey, it's because it is ungodly confusing because we're not exactly sure what's going on with the FBI.
Yeah, maybe they can do the same for Leonard Peltier.
My God, I hope so. From your lips to dog's ears.
Governor Siegelman, I'm sure you're familiar with both the Leonard Peltier and the Julian Assange case, not to mention Steve Donziger, who's been on our calls. Do you want to comment on any of these three cases?
Well, I think that I think the government should be looking for a way out, and I'm not sure that that's possible, but it's the most sensible thing for the government to do, and maybe it is possible. I'm not sure what Merrick Garland's what his attitude is with regard to any of those matters, but he is at least a moderate and also someone who seems to give considerable thought to the cases that come before him.
Did you
Hey,
find
Vinny,
any?
I'll slug
any
out real
help?
quick. I wanted to ask Vinny, with the escalating tensions between the United States and Australia, is it possible that Australia is trying to intervene to free Julian Assange?
I believe you are absolutely correct. At least 70 members of the Australian Parliament, and I might add 50 members of the British Parliament as well, have called for the immediate release. Anthony Albanese, in his own kind of weak fashion, has said that enough is enough. And I believe the fact that AUKUS is on the map right now, and that is the huge military expenditure that the Australian government is being asked to make to the United States weighs in that favor. And I think that they are finally beginning to realize that it is incumbent upon them to stand up and defend one of their citizens who is being prosecuted, quite frankly. Now, I'm biased on this, but I don't see any legal merit to the case. He is being charged for telling the truth. And if there's one thing that I can add here, Harvey, as well, July 3rd is Julian Assange's birthday. We are planning, it's just in the nascent planning stages right now, something called a banner drop that will occur hopefully in 50 cities across the United States, which will be providing banners to people all across the country to drop them, to take Joe Biden's words from the White House press correspondence dinner and make them eat them. And that is that journalism is not a crime. And if it is not a crime, you must free Julian Assange. And so anybody that's on this call that wishes to participate in that action, please reach out and contact me. Get my contact information, my phone number, email address from Wendy, and reach out to me and let me know.
Thank you, Vinny. I wanted to ask Don, and then we'll go to Mary, Jeffrey, and Justin, and then we're going to move on and let you go. Did anybody come to your aid? Any particular organizations help you shorten your jail time or deal with you, your situation while you were in prison?
The only two notable, and I mean, there were, of course, I had, a whole, some incredible people and scholars. The current dean of Berkeley Law School, Erwin Chemerinsky, wrote a brief for the United States Supreme Court. The dean of Rutgers Law School, I had, again, 113 former state attorneys general, including a dear friend who passed away about a little over a year ago, Grant Woods, whose wife Marlene is running for Congress in Arizona. But Grant told Scott Pelley that he believed, again, Grant was not only a Republican attorney general from Arizona, but was also the national co-chairman of John McCain's presidential campaign. And he said he personally believed that the reason I was targeted because I was the only Democrat that Republicans couldn't get rid of fair and square. Al Gore came to my defense and spoke out and wrote his supporters. But, I did not have, and Steny Hoyer and John Lewis and a number of members of Congress were supporters and did what they could. I had governors from around the country that were trying to get the attention of President Obama, and but it, all in all, it was the, if in every situation there's a purpose, or if in every situation one should find a purpose, again, it was like God telling me, okay, Governor, you've seen what's wrong, now go fix it. So as someone noted, I didn't come out of this bitter. I came out of it better educated and better armed with information that I hope will lead to the balancing of our scales of justice. It will lead to the end of the abuse of power, whether it's by police, prosecutors, or presidents, and will get our prison system turned right side up. So, I've got a different passion now. I no longer am going around shaking hands, asking people to vote for me. I'm going around trying to, here in Alabama, trying to get people off death row.
Well, you're a tremendous inspiration, no doubt about that. Jeffrey, very quickly, please. Then Mary, Justin, and Dorothy Reich is with us. So, and then we're going to let you go, Governor. But boy, it's been really great having you. We still have 64 people with us. Jeffrey, go ahead.
First off,
very quickly,
Harvey,
Jeffrey.
Harvey, I want to ask you something at the end of the meeting, and now for and now for Don Siegelman, and maybe you too, Wendy, because Gavin Newsom passed a law in California that would be very helpful if it was actually federal nationwide. It's California SB 2, which actually automatically gets bad cops off the street, and not only that, it also prevents them from going to other police stations and being rehired in the state, which would be a good idea to apply, especially in Florida, where Ron DeSantis is trying to recruit bad cops.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for that. That's SB2. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Don. Jeffrey is
I'm not familiar with it, but I intend to get familiar. The only thing I've joined since leaving public office is the Civilian Review Board here in Birmingham, Alabama. So this is right up my alley. So I'm gonna be a student of SB2.
okay. Great. Thank you so much, Don, and thank you, Jeffrey, for that. Mary, Justin, and Dorothy. And then if you want to ask a question, ask it now, please, because we've had the good governor here for over an hour, almost an hour and a quarter, and we want to let him move on. Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, we're trying to unmute Mary. She's had problems with her setup, so she hasn't been able to unmute, but we'll do the best we can.
All right, go ahead, Justin, and then Dorothy, and we'll come back to Mary.
Good evening, Governor Siegelman. So I was wondering, when I hear Karl Rove's name, the immediate idea that comes to my mind is corporate capture. And so one of the things that's been put before the Supreme Court recently and actually passed in HEDY TRIPP's state, she was the first state in the nation to accomplish this, is a ban on multinational money, multinational corporations, et cetera, from participating in elections. And the loophole for this is, while Citizens United opened the flood of money as speech, this closes and slams the door shut again, because 98% of S&P companies have over 1% individual or 5% group investment by foreigners. And that's considered by the SEC and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to be influential, which is, too much threshold for them to be participating in politics. So other states are following suit. Other cities have done this before. In fact, gone through 2 election cycles with no challenges, like you said, writing your book and having no challenges to the information. I'm wondering what you think of trying to go after corporate capture.
Well, I think I'm all in favor of ending the corporate involvement and participation in elections. I mean, it's just another example of where we've gone off the rails in this country. And the Supreme Court and Citizens United opened the gates, and we've got to close them.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dorothy Reich. Dorothy is in California, Don, and probably met your daughter somewhere. Did you meet Dana?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say, that I don't know, how's my sound? Is it okay? I was just going to say, great to see you, Don, following this outrage for at least a decade. And your daughter has been a great support for you. And we've met her a few times out here in California. She came to raise funds for you. I don't know if you're still in need of funds. If you are, you should stick your GoFundMe or whatever into the chat so we can all chip in a little bit. But it's Kafka. It reminds me of Steve Donziger. The two cases so similar where the government just is totally lawless. And I hope that I'm glad to see that you're looking good and you survived the tortures that they put you through. It makes you embarrassed to be an American.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I look forward to passing your best regards on to my daughter, Dana. She was a great inspiration, great fighter for her dad. And yeah, we relish our time together, but she's been just a great trooper, a great support for me. So thank you very much.
Well, Don, I have 5 daughters, and I hope to God if they ever throw me in prison, they'll be as steadfast for me as Dana has been for you. She's really an inspiration in her own right. Very, very powerful. Did we get Mary Stonewall?
Yes, we did.
Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, we did get him.
Mary, go ahead.
All right. When you were talking, sir, about having problems with elections, I ran for city council, and because I didn't criminalize homelessness and actually talked about a program that we could start would be a 3-step program to cut veteran suicide by 75%. Instead, they kept a dead man on the ticket that split my vote, so therefore I wasn't able to get elected. And then finally, real quick, like you guys may not know this is a red alert. The Republican Party this year, for anybody to sign up on the Republican ticket, must sign a contract that states whoever wins the primary, it's illegal for them to say any naysay about the person that's running for office. Now, this is unconstitutional in my book, but we need to get people moving to say it's unconstitutional on the Hill, because I don't think that we should have to sign a contract like this. It makes it basically to where they lose their voice as citizens just because they're on a Republican Party, and that's not what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be there for the citizen. So if they even lose their citizen right, where's ours? So people, please look into the fact that the Republican Party is making it mandatory in order to run on the ticket. You have to sign a contract of allegiance to the Republican Party.
Amazing. Okay. Don, I don't imagine you'll be running soon as a Republican, but let's hope you don't have to sign such a contract. While we still have you, just for these last few minutes, I want to go back to Vinny DiStefano. Vinny, if you're still with us there, if there's anything you can throw in at the end here about Julian linking up to Don Siegelman and Steve Donziger, that'd be great.
Well, all I can say is that go to the Assange Defense website and see the actions we've got there. And Governor Siegelman, if there's any way we can work together, it would be my distinct honor and pleasure.
Well, let's talk in the next day or so, and I look forward to getting one of your banners.
Fantastic, fantastic. Wendy can get you all my contact information. Wendy, if you'd be so kind as to do that, I'd love to be able to do that. Governor Siegelman, thank you very, very much.
I want to thank you, Vinny. I want to mention 2 of my comrades here, Camilla Reese and Dave Saltman, are with us and very aware of your plight and the importance of your fight here. And I just got to say, you know, as someone who encountered Karl Rove, God knows how long ago. I mean, whenever I hear his name, I will tell you one story about Karl Rove. He came into the University of Texas once and consulted with a colleague of mine in the history department because he wanted to learn about Mark Hanna, who was the guy, the manipulator that put William McKinley in the White House. So just for your reference, that's a backstory on Karl Rove, who, you know, just, and I believe Karl Rove is going to be supporting Ron DeSantis, and God help us all. So Ruth Strauss, our fellow Alabaman, will give you the last word with Don Siegelman.
This is just a quickie. You know, Robert Green, I forget, Greenberg, pardon?
Greenwald,
right, does documentaries, and it might be good for you to suggest that he do one on you and Julian and Steve. You know, just a thought. Thank you.
and maybe Leonard Peltier as well. whose
Yeah.
story is just beyond belief in this country. I love how we tell the rest of the world we're a bastion of freedom and liberty, and then we have these horrific cases like Don's and Steve Donziger and Leonard Peltier and Julian Assange. I mean, come on, really. Anyway, Don, it's just been a real honor to have you with us. We want to have you back again sometime. And we want to hope that I know Dennis Bernstein is really going to make good use of the connection. You really need to connect with Tatanka and Danny Sheehan. It's just been a great honor to have you with us. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. You notice my background is my office, and there are books, and I'm looking at your background, and I would next time maybe I could be in your background and you can be in my background.
Well, you can come with me. We'll jump in. I just read an article. There are a lot more great white sharks in California than people thought, but none of them is as vicious as Karl Rove. I also like you to help us shut the nuclear power plants in Alabama. That's our next discussion. But thank you so much for being with us.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, and God bless all of you, and let's keep up the fight.
What choice do we have?
We don't.
Okay. Vinny DiStefano, thank you as well. We're going to continue now. We still have 60 people. I do want to mention, and I have Ron Leonard on with us, I hope, still, there he is. I want to switch. I have actually seen a movie that probably none of you have yet seen. It's called Nuclear Now. It's by Oliver Stone. And it is probably the most infuriating film I've ever seen. I had to go all the way to Martha's Vineyard to see it. And they would not allow me, well, they did actually at the end. They had a pro-nuclear guy speak at the end of the film. And then they set aside a time for me to speak. But by then, people were pretty tired. Nuclear Now is a film by the guy who brought us Apocalypse Now. One thing about the right wing is they rarely have a sense of irony. How you go from Apocalypse Now to Nuclear Now and not make the connection, only the right wing could do that. But this film is so pernicious and so infuriating that I can barely speak about it. I don't know, it's not yet in a whole lot of major theaters, but it is a 100, basically about 100-minute infomercial for atomic power, which is hosted by Oliver Stone, who if you don't know anything about nuclear power, you're going to think that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. There are no opposing voices in this film. This is the second straight pro-nuclear film that has featured me. The first one was a film called Pandora's Promise.
Ooh.
And it opens with Helen Caldicott, the great anti-nuclear activist. The second clip of it is me. And it's got me giving a speech. And it says, I'm asking the permission of the audience if I can use the F word, which obviously is meant to show me as some coarse, potty mouth, idiot activist. In fact, when you talk about nuclear power, the F word is obvious. It's Fukushima. And they don't deal with that. So no sense of irony there. In this film, in Oliver Stone, there's a clip of me saying that I hoped that the rates would rise with nuclear power. And that again is meant to show, put me down. But in fact, if nuclear power's rates would rise and they paid their own way, we wouldn't have nuclear power. And in fact, I just sent to Steve today a link to post about a new study that maybe Ron Leonard knows about, showing that the price of these small modular reactors that Oliver Stone gushes all sorts of praise on has soared through the roof. And I will say this, and it's astounding. It's a lot about this movie that's astounding. Completely ignores all the research done on radiation and health. Absolutely portrays radiation as something that will make you healthier. It's mind-boggling that they could do this in a film like this. There's a clip from the op-ed by Don Siegelman against the death penalty. Very good, Steve. It's in the Washington Post about a week ago or 2 weeks ago. But in my case, this whole film about nuclear power, but which we're hearing so much, never discusses the cost of nuclear power plant. It's astounding. The economics of nuclear power never enter this puff piece for the industry. He also never mentions the connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons, never does that. Never talks about the death toll, truthfully, about the death tolls at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. Completely whitewashes them. And again, no opposing voices. What they do is they show clips. Albert Stone shows clips of Jane Fonda, of people getting arrested, at arm's length, shows the realities that we were marching against nuclear power. And he shows a picture of John Goffman, the great health expert against nuclear power, never talks to him, never quotes him, never explains who he is or what he stood for. So if you don't know, if you go into this hour and 40-minute film and know nothing about nuclear power, you will emerge, again, knowing nothing about nuclear power, except that it's this wonderful, perfect technology that's going to save us all. It's
I think we should.
I'll finish. It's the triumph of the will of the nuclear power industry. Completely.
I think we should give nuclear power a break, because the new nuclear power is much more expensive than the old nuclear power and probably more dangerous.
Oh, yes. Well, it's not dangerous now because it doesn't exist.
It don't exist.
The only thing that's dangerous about new nuclear reactors at the moment is that they're sucking up all the money that should be going into renewables. And he completely dismisses renewables. And I'm going to give you one hit before I call on Mila here. And then Ron, and then Vinny, and then Ron. Whenever you hear someone telling you that wind power takes up a huge amount of area, right? This is a complete shibboleth, a complete falsehood. I was in the wind business. And when you have wind power and being sold to a farmer, say a farmer has a couple thousand acres of land and he wants a couple hundred windmills on that land. So what the opponents of wind power say is that the wind farm will take up a couple square miles of land or whatever it is. In fact, every windmill, every wind turbine, even the very biggest of them, only take up an acre of land because the rest of it is vacant. You don't stack windmills next to each other because they shade each other and they bump into each other. So if you're going to put 10 windmills on 1,000 acres of land, which is not unreasonable, it takes up 10 acres. And the cows can walk right up to the pole and rub their backs, which they do all the time. And, for a windmill to harm a cow takes a really tall cow, so no. And so that is a dead giveaway. In this film, he says that wind farms take up thousands of acres. It's a total lie. It's utterly ridiculous. So anyway, this film, if you're going to go see this film, bring a magazine or something. I mean, it's really, really boring and really infuriating. But people who don't know anything about the topic will never hear an opposing view and will come out with this, triumph of the will feeling that nuclear power is great. Never mentions costs, completely dismisses the health impacts, completely dismisses Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island. Absolutely outrageous. And Oliver Stone really should be ashamed of himself. It's
You should
worse
give
than
him,
you imagine.
you should give
Okay,
him a
my
pardon. You should give him a pardon, and that way he will not feel guilty about producing this nuclear film.
What he should do is go occupy Don Siegelman's old cell. That's what he should do. Anyway, Myla Reeson, you had a hand, and then Vinny.
Can you see this beautiful smiling?
Yes, that was
picture?
John Goffman. He should have won a Nobel Prize. He was the chief health officer of the Atomic Energy Commission. He was part of the Manhattan Project. He was a co-discoverer of plutonium, and he was also a medical doctor who was a co-discoverer of what's the stuff in your bloodstream? I'll get it in a minute. So anyway,
and Harvey did this famous quote that I have often used.
Go for it.
Goffman said, licensing a nuclear power plant is, in my view, licensing random, premeditated murder. First of all,
this is a guy, go ahead, finish it.
Okay, first of all, when you license a plant, you know what you're doing. So it's premeditated. You can't say, I didn't know. Second, the evidence on radiation producing cancer is beyond doubt. I've worked 15 years on it, and that was what he said as of 1982, and so have many others. It is not a question anymore. Radiation produces cancer, and the evidence is good all the way down to the lowest doses. So I wanted to share that, and then after we're finished talking about Professor Goffman, I have a report. I left this meeting to attend a hearing from the California State Land Commission, where they voted to extend the lease of PG&E's lease for Diablo Canyon. The Diablo Canyon is sited on California coastal land owned by the state of California. So they voted to renew the lease, and they voted once again to ignore the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, which would have required them, among other things, to produce a environmental impact statement prior to extending the lease. But I've got a little bit to say about that, if I can continue.
Yeah, I just want to explain the other thing that John Goffman, it's quite a combination. John Goffman was a co-discoverer of plutonium and also of LDL cholesterol. And he should have gotten a Nobel Prize for each discovery. Okay, go ahead. And then Myla, then we'll go to Vinny, and then we'll go to Ron Leonard, who I invited on.
And Dorothy Reich also has a hand raised.
Okay.
So at any rate, the State Land Commission is populated by 3 individuals. The Lieutenant Governor is automatically a member of the Land Commission, as is the State Controller, who happens to be Malia Cohen. And prior to voting to extend the lease and ignore CEQA or waive CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, she made a little speech. And she talked about how, first of all, how concerned she was because she is the state controller and her primary interest is fiscal responsibility. So that touches on something you just said. She was making the claim that it was the most fiscally responsible thing that she could do to allow PG&E to extend their operation of Diablo. And then to put a cherry on top of the whatever, she talked about how but she's really concerned about the climate crisis. And she's concerned about fossil fuel, as if we have to pick our poison, as if we have to choose between nuclear power and coal and fossil fuel. So at the beginning, she admitted that she really knows very little about all of this, and she convinced me that she does by finally voting yes to extend the lease. So
It's
that's
outrageous. I mean, what I want to know is, how do you cool the planet with a radioactive fire that burns at 570 degrees Fahrenheit? Yeah, isn't that kind of counterintuitive? Vinny, did you have something you know we're gonna?
Yes, I
we'll-
do. If you build a house and you are planning on having a kitchen in that house, one of the things you must have as well is a bathroom. And that is the key flaw with nuclear power. And behind Mila, you have a picture of it. And that is, what do you do with the waste? And there is nothing, zero at this point, other than piling it up and putting it in pools as they did in Fukushima, that can deal with that waste. And that is an argument that you just can't deny. I mean, if you create the waste, what are you going to do with it for the next 22,000 years?
Well, they did deny it in Stone's movie, and they did something that I saw 50 years ago. They said, "Oh, if we take all those barrels behind Mila, we can just stack them in a football field." I mean, this is the same old BS. I mean, I was shocked by how much BS that they put in this film that I'd seen 50 years ago. You know, I've been doing this issue since 1973. So it's actually 50 years. And he had stuff in there that's a half century old. Dorothy, and then I want to go to Ron Leonard, who I invited on, and Ron's always with us, but he's got a ton of stuff on the war against renewables, and that's the flip side of this. Dorothy, go ahead. Dorothy Reich. There we go. Up. And then I'll unmute Ron. Ron, are you unmuted? Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, we have a big problem because we have some of our progressive heroes supporting nuclear. Sheldon Whitehouse and Brian Schatz. And they are both on the board of something called Climate Hawks Vote, which is R.L. Miller's PAC or whatever it is. And she endorses and supports and raises money and sends out people to support these people. They knock on doors, they make phone calls. That's what she does. And she's good on most things on the environment. She's kind of, haven't been agreeing with her on a bunch of stuff lately, but she's a powerful voice. And she's got Sheldon Whitehouse and Brian Schatz on her board of Climate Hawks Vote. So we need to be aware that this is gaining momentum here. They tried to put a bunch of little nuclear plants in California and it got shot down, but they'll try again.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dorothy. Ron Leonard, do you want to give us, and then we'll go to Tatanka, the flip side of this, the war on solar and on wind has just been escalating ridiculously. Do you want to fill us in on some of the latest developments?
Well, I mean, California has recently been a point of contention for all of us at these meetings, that they've really done a dirty service in killing the ability for ratepayers to escape rates, which have gone up 100% in California in a few years, by stopping them from putting solar on their roof. And you know, that's a bad thing to do. 1.5 million homeowners had solar on their roof, and now starting last month, they really shouldn't put solar on their roof, because if, for example, they had any excess energy that they didn't use that day that would normally go to their neighbors, they would be able to give that as a gift, really, to the utility, and only get about 2 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour for it, whereas the utility then takes that energy and sells it to their neighbors for 30 cents and makes an outrageous profit at no cost to them. So that was a horrible deal, because basically the utilities put together a $1.7 million slush fund and convinced the Energy Commission that somehow, magically, that when people put solar on their roofs, that is disadvantaging all the other ratepayers in California, which is also nuts because, frankly, twice last summer, those solar roofs saved the entire grid in California when it went over 100 degrees, because California had no excess electricity to produce, and the excess electricity they normally would have in battery systems was no longer available because they drained those batteries at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So crazy, crazy, crazy. And then the governor pops off the icing on the cake. He comes out a week ago and says, it's in the chat, we have a plan to go 100% renewable energy in California. Well, how's that going to work out when the solar roofs are not really available to people because they make no economic sense to do it? And if you have a large solar farm, which he says and admits to, and want to get a permit in California, well, you could probably do that in, I don't know, 5 years if you're lucky, after all the paperwork and all the other, checks and balances. So that's not happening really quick. And other places that we would like to see solar sited, like Harvey mentions, on top of canals that are used for nothing other than transport water underneath. We could cap those canals with a nice solar panel and prevent evaporation. We could put solar panels on roofs. The Costco's and the Walmarts and the other big box stores in California could literally put enough solar on their edifices to support California's failing grid. And it's a failure of management as much as a failure to get away from fossil fuel. So California, probably a problem. So what happens then? Texas jumps into the picture. Texas has really been a bastion about putting large amounts of solar energy on the grid. After a couple of years ago, our friend Hightower pointed out to the foible that they had in California, where in the middle of the winter, the lights went out. What? What do you mean? Well, the lights went out because they didn't manage the assets of the grid so that it could survive cold temperatures. Of course, it never gets cold in California, except when it did. And then the lights basically went out on millions of ratepayers, or they had a good alternative for those ratepayers. Instead of spending 9 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity, they had the option of buying electricity at $9. Woo, what a bargain. It was great. I mean, the solution was found. Of course, that really doesn't work out well for people who don't have a lot of money and don't like to get ripped off. And they decided just recently that they were going to solve that problem by what? Preventing more renewable energy to get on the grid. Even though a lot got on the grid after that disaster, now they don't want more to get in on the grid. And surprisingly, they weren't very successful in stopping this renewable energy wave of change in this horrendous bill. And we shall see how the battle wins out across the nation, because it truly is a battle. It's well funded, well orchestrated, just like the battle that Harvey keeps talking about. There has been meetings, and I've seen it even as far away as Puerto Rico, in every state of the union over the last 3 years on promoting small modular nuclear reactors. And these meetings are being held, of course, at the best interest of the public and to influence people who are, they think, change makers, or people who have a high voice in the community. And these meetings are put on by volunteers. Interesting how the volunteers all of a sudden showed up with enough money to do this, of course, every state in the nation, for free. Good thought.
Thank you, Ron. And since you mentioned the word free, I want to point out that when the nuclear power industry first got going, the chair of the Atomic Energy Commission, Louis Strauss, promised that nuclear power would deliver electricity too cheap to meter. That never happened until Texas built thousands and thousands of windmills and actually gives away electricity free at night in West Texas because they, there's so much of it at night on the grid, they just give it away. If you
But
want
good news
do
to
laundry-
those West Texas residences who are counting on that nuclear power plant in Texas to provide power when it gets real hot in Texas, except they have to shut them off because it's too hot out.
Yeah, the reactors, and we're seeing a lot of that in France now. So nuclear power never delivered electricity too cheap to meter, but wind power in Texas definitely has. Tatanka Bricka, you've got a hand, and Julie hasn't spoken yet, and then Justin, Wendy, and Jeff. Go ahead, Tatanka.
Yeah, thank you for the first hour. First hour was described as Kafkaesque. This is also so. The whole we are witnessing with some of our friends being pro-nuclear, the effect of massive corporate capture in a way that is corporate capturing our culture, our language, our values, turning it on its head. It's very purposeful. I mentioned to Harvey, and I debated even mentioning this because I want to have a follow-up conversation with him to try to get him to debate Harvey, but
You mean Oliver Stone?
pardon me?
Oliver Stone. You wanted me to debate Oliver Stone?
Well, Oliver or his shill, my friend Joshua Goldstein, who I was mentioning to you that I just on a fluke, I haven't talked to Joshua in 40, 50 years, but we did a lot of great work. He really principled, as I knew him, progressive Jewish activist who was also interested in two-state solution, met with Sadat as well as everybody in Israel. I mean, really bright guy, went to teach at American University. And I haven't talked to him in decades. So I called up, I said, you're probably retired, living in Virginia. How are the kids? As was last summer. And he said, yeah, but it's true and everything. I said, well, how's retirement? He said, well, and then he said, don't judge me too much. I'm consulting with the nuclear industry. I said, wow, how interesting. I really, I'm all ears. How did you make this transition? And then we agreed to talk at a later time. Never got back. And Harvey said, what's his last name? And he said, I think he's the guy working with Oliver. So I looked up, this was about a month ago. And there he is, World Economic Forum, he and Oliver, pitching nuclear now. And what you said, Harvey, is very accurate, except the one thing is that when Oliver, I was reading Oliver's body language, I think there's a part of him, I don't know how much is conscious and unconscious, but he just felt so in his body, so conflicted, talking, oh, big nuclear, small nuclear, everybody get on board, but he was like in torture saying it, right? Joshua steps in and he says, well, one of the problems was, and talking about all of us, our whole lifetime commitment to sparing the world from nuclear power, nuclear weapons. He says, we all got misled because when people hear nuclear power now, they think nuclear weapons. Duh, right? It's the whole reason that it exists, right? To provide fissile material. Oh no, they're entirely different. So he divorces that whole idea. Then in order to not talk about radiation, he says, we are really interested in climate change and we've got to get rid of the number one killer, which is coal. Nuclear doesn't kill people. It's killed a couple of people. Coal kills all these people, right? And then something about radiation. We know now in radiation, the way the brain works and how powerful we are, we can transmute that. He just sort of throws that away, right? The whole health thing, they throw it all away. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is I was watching a film on Herb Alpert recently because I need to get in touch with Herb and Lonnie, and I haven't seen them in a while. Amazing film called Herb Alpert Is. Beautiful film. And the way Herb kind of went through his life in music and everything is he followed how something felt true in his heart, right? He said, I don't think people listen with their ears. I think they listen with their soul. And there's something about the way we need to approach this. We know rationally this makes no sense, okay? But what the right is very good at doing, and has been for some time, is to totally bypass truth and go straight for people's emotions, right? And the deception possibilities are infinite, and we're watching it happen. We're watching it happen. So I don't have a night this week. I'm not doing Zooms, mainly for Romero, because we're still, now we're working one night a week with everybody together, and 4 nights a week doing all this research for this government in waiting, the progressive government in waiting document, which has principles, policies, and programs. It's a huge undertaking, okay? But a week from Thursday, I have Thursday night off, and Harvey, I'm probably going to convene. We can talk about it next Monday. I want to convene a brainstorm, heartstorm group on this issue of nuclear power, because we need to come up with a strategy, a winning strategy. And I believe we can, because I think there's enough people that know that they're being duped. But the money is so incredible. And one of the things that I want to say that is hopeful is in 2016, when Trump was elected and everything was going down the tubes, there was a group in our Tri-County area of Santa Cruz, San Benito, and Monterey counties had a anti-fracking initiative on the ballot. Chevron and Shell came in. They put $7 million in a concentrated campaign. And in Salinas and all the areas, we're buying off all our progressive folks and liberal folks at about the average of $2,000 a week for 6 to 8 weeks, just basically to say how wonderful fracking is, right? These are people who desperately needed money. We had a little scrappy group with Romero and other groups, all going out to the churches and getting the bishop involved and doing grassroots organizing, and less than $200,000. And we won that election, 60 to 40. We won it, but we won it at the grassroots level. And there was some young person asking me, gosh, where do you find hope? How are we going to overcome all this? I said, you know what? You can hear this as negative or you can hear it as positive. That we're in a super saturated solution of global corporate capture and lies abounding, right? And we know we have the truth on our side. We have to somehow access that truth, inside people. And we know from this grassroots election protection, God bless you, Harvey, with all the work that we've done, 137 weeks now, we know that grassroots year-round organizing, trusted messengers, turns people out. Turns out 95, 96% people to save the Georgia miracle and the Georgia way. Turns out all the indigenous people from Standing Rock, New York Times said this was the turning point in the Arizona election. Anyway, that's the bad news, if you hear it that way, is God, it's all this local stuff. It just seems we need a big solution. And as Pete Seeger said, these scales of justice, there's millions of people putting it into the scale to overcome, the injustice. And it's going out in a leak in the scale. And finally, it's going in faster than it leaks out. And one day it goes whoomp like this. And all the people will be looking for all the big reasons that happened when he said it was 1 billion people putting their little thing in. So we need a movement. We need a global movement that is local. And it's around community, and it's around rights of nature, and it's around human rights. Whatever people are doing globally to have resiliency with the climate change, with the nukes, with the economics, which are killing people, we need that grassroots thing to take hold and be a global movement, like a union, like a community union, a union of communities globally that's working to save ourselves. And we need a viable planet, and we need viable policies. I see it as a possible solution. And so I want to brainstorm heartstorm brainstorm of ways that we can communicate We know we've got the facts on our side, but we have to find ways that really get to people's hearts, and not just talking, but, oh, here we go. This is a great image. Cultural ways, you know, and get the cultural leaders in music, get the athletes that are working to get out the vote in the African-American community all throughout, and take that energy and somehow create, because we've got the producers, we've got the music people, we've got the whole culture with us, do something that is both local and global. And it can start with nuclear power.
Well,
it really can, because this is a travesty. We need to do it.
Thank you, Tatanka. Thank you for that. It is beyond a travesty. And, you know.
So I'll host a Zoom a week from, pardon me, I just say I'll host a Zoom a week from Thursday at 7 o'clock, and we'll announce it next week. Okay.
Oh, yeah, put the link in there. I do want to say also at the top of the hour, this is our second hour at 7 o'clock. We have 49 people, and we'll just keep talking. Nowhere better, and no better group of people to be with. I do want to acknowledge there is at least one guy on the call who has a solar roof. That's Paul Newman. Still has Franklin Roosevelt behind him. I'm waiting for you to get a pinup of Eleanor there. You know, we gotta be fair here, Paul. But Paul does have a solar roof, and it works great, right? Anyway, okay. Thank you for that.
Good, but so
we're gonna keep. What's that, Paul?
Yeah, I was going to say Southern California Edison is now, you know, cutting the amount of money that from the power they're getting from me. They're reducing the credits from net metering.
Absolutely outrageous. You know, so instead of charging you 10 times as much for what you sell them, they're going to charge you 100 times as much. Criminal. It's criminal. But anyway, Paul doesn't have, in fact, have a solar roof. Julie Weiner in New York. I don't know if you've got a solar roof, but it's good to hear from you. Good to see you. Thank you again, Tatanka, for that, and Paul. Go ahead, Julie. Let's get you unmuted here.
There we go. Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry, no solar roof and no good news today. New York State, the New York State Legislature is preventing consideration of a bill that would have guaranteed us a right to vote on hand-marked paper ballots or a non-tabulating ballot marking device. Very, very simple bill, just those rules and no counting votes with barcodes. And the reason we're about to be defeated on this, that the legislative leaders would not even bring it to the floor, and there's only 3 days left in the session, is that it appears to me, is that the lobbyist for ES&S that wants to sell us the Express Vote Excel, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with all the details of these monstrous universal use ballot marking devices that count votes with barcodes, but they hired the lobbyist David Off Hutcher and Citron, and David Off hired the former chair of the Election Law Committee, civil rights icon, and I don't know how you say the word Sion, Keith Wright, the son of Turn 'em Loose Bruce Wright, and the former powerful legislator. And as soon as he lost a bid to run for Congress, he became a lobbyist. And he's an old friend of Hazel Dukes and the whole establishment in New York. So as of yesterday, the Daily News published an editorial accusing those who want to keep hand-marked paper ballots. This is, quote, David Patterson saying that we want a separate but equal voting system for people with disabilities. So people with disabilities are tired of voting on, rightfully tired of voting on voting machines that the election commissioners don't bother keeping working order in the corner. But, you know, we could pass a bill to keep them in working order. So anyway, that touting ES&S Express Vote Excel, which has had has thrown lots of elections. I mean, you know, but worked so poorly, been delivered so poorly, in such bad working order that they actually could catch the errors that were made from the little ballot summaries that the thing produces in, I think that was Philadelphia. Anyway, I'm just reporting a defeat. I'm not sure what we're going to do with getting out the vote in New York, because we're not going to be voted on voting machines that can be verified. You can't, the ballots on the Express Vote Excel are a tiny list under a piece of plexiglass that's going to instantly get scratchy. And it's very hard to read even when it's new. So as soon as the things are old, you're not going to be able to read your ballot summary at all. And anyway, even if you can, about 7% of people, 93% of people don't catch errors on their ballots. And I don't remember the number. I couldn't find the study today. But it's probably something like less than 1% of people spend more than 30 seconds or something like that reviewing their ballot. So we don't have verified voting anymore in New York if we don't have hand-marked paper ballots. And if they certify this machine, we won't have paper ballots. And the legislature is gung-ho and has recruited the whole elite of the civil rights movement, or not the whole thing, maybe, I don't know. We have a few disability rights activists and a few African American and disability organizations who are still saying we have to prioritize security and accessibility equally, and that they're not in conflict. But most of the bigwigs, most of the powers that be, are prioritizing what they're calling accessibility. I'm not sure what it means if you don't have adequate security.
Sorry to hear it, Julie. Keep us posted. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry I didn't grab you over the last 6 months to get a little more help on this. But yeah.
Well, we'll keep on it. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll keep on.
Thank you,
Next
Julie.
stop is the Board of Elections, where they're going to try and certify them. So we've got to get some high-powered legal help to figure out if we can find a way to prove that they don't comply with New York State or HAVA election law. So,
Okay.
anybody?
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Charles Lamont has not spoken yet. Go ahead, Charles Lamont, then we'll go back to Justin and Wendy.
Hi. Oh, there I am.
Yeah.
I'm from California, San Pedro area. I have family within 10 miles of Diablo Canyon. And part of the family moved back from New Hampshire to be there, just to have the family closer. I'm doing a film on the Price-Anderson Act. I think the Price-Anderson Act is where we got to go and just look at people's self-interest and don't worry about party issues. Worry about the self-interest and maybe greed. I'm a homeowner, but my house just started making me money. I'm a musician, and when COVID hit, got really hard for us, so I squeezed into the back of my house, and now I'm going, my life is better used making a movie about the Price-Anderson Act. But it's just simple. If your house gets irradiated, and I have family down by I can't even think of it right now, the one San Clemente, that have been radiated working at Diablo. I mean, help me out here. And then it doesn't matter the name of the reactor.
San Onofre.
San Onofre. But if your house gets radioactive, the only thing that stays alive is your mortgage. So are you? No, seriously.
Very well put. I never heard it put that way.
Well, that's why this movie needs to be made, because it's everybody will go, I don't care who's running.
You're getting some technical.
Charles, PG&E is messing with your
investment
microphone.
And where I paying myself to this mortgage for the rest of my life, and I can't live in the house anymore, and it has no value. I come from pardon me,
Charles. We can't hear you very well, but I am in touch with you. And
I'm sorry, I can get closer. I'm doing it on an iPad.
Okay, but go ahead, because we're running out of time.
Okay, so anyway, the movie's coming, and I'm working on it, and I just think it's so easily explained in about 3 sentences, which is when your house becomes radioactive, you still owe all the money on the mortgage, and you'll probably move, unless the people just go, well, a little radioactivity won't hurt us. But everything, Fukushima is now on record as dumping Fukushima water into the ocean. It's not theoretically. Anyway, I'll give it up. So,
take a look at the Netflix movie called The Days on Fukushima. It's a series, and it's one of the first things I've ever seen on Netflix that I could recommend. It's chilling.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Would you repeat
also
that?
the HBO.
Yeah, it's in the chat. Take a look. It's Netflix, The Days. It's a series on Fukushima.
And you got everybody really needs to see the HBO series on Chernobyl. I mean, it's devastating. I recommend people scoff, but I think the best way to watch the HBO series on Chernobyl, which runs about 8 hours, you're not going to sleep the night that you see it. So the best way to do it is start it early in the day, watch a few hours, take a break, watch a few more hours, and then get the whole thing done in one day. But the HBO series on Chernobyl is the most chilling thing I've ever seen on television, by far, and very, very accurate, actually, in general. Okay, we're going to start to wind down. We still have 44 people with us, but we've been at it 2.5 hours. Let's do Jeffrey very quickly. Wendy and Justin, if you want to speak again, please raise your hand, but do it now. And then let's roll on out. Jeffrey, go ahead, please, very quickly.
All right, there's questions for both you and Tatanka, and then
hurry up,
and then
please.
Mila.
No, you
one for
can't do
Mila.
3, Jeffrey. Not fair. Just do one question, please. Go ahead.
I was going to ask for Mila's phone number for the
Okay,
project.
go ahead. Ask a question of substance.
And for you, I wanted your permission if I could share the contact with the frontline PBS for the documentary on shutting down Diablo Canyon.
Of course, go ahead. Okay, that's fine.
That's why I asked Mila's contact phone numbers, because Justin informed me about
your contacts. What else you need?
Same thing with Tatanka Tatanka, permission about the contact sharing. Since all 3 of you know a lot about the Diablo Canyon, I thought you would,
Okay, good. Thank you for that, Jeffrey. We appreciate it. And keep up your good work. Justin, and then Wendy will give you the last word unless somebody else jumps in. Justin, go ahead.
All right. So Tatanka brought up all of the money behind a lot of the nuclear promotions, and so part of gathering a movement around that. Paul Newman in the chat brought up a part about how the bankers are making liability for the nuclear companies basically non-existent. And that's also the case in so many other things that affect young people, such as housing and the cost of living. So really, it's a whole system, a whole spectrum. And the one that I want to bring up in relation to energy right now is that your rates for your electricity company, and probably even rates for premiums in healthcare, can be turned around and spent back into trying to elect and or bribe politicians. So this is, again, corporate capture, and why I keep coming on these calls to remind people there are bills going through various states. We really need to push hard back on multinational money, especially because 40% of all stocks in America are owned by foreigners. Like, that's pretty much 40% of America owned by foreigners, and they don't have local interests in mind. They have international cash flows in mind. So we need to make local elections local again.
Great, thank you for that. Much appreciated. We'll go to George. Justin, keep up. We'll go to George Ripley, who hasn't spoken today. George, let's get you unmuted. Okay, go ahead, George.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that Lulu, for Julie Weiner, that Lulu Friestad had just had a wonderful article in the New York Times about these election machines.
Yeah, Lulu is featured in, I have the link that, maybe Steve can put in the chat, but I don't know how many you can get past the paywall. But Lulu is featured in a piece today at the in the New York Times.
It's available on various, various sources who've gotten past the payroll, I think.
Are you talking about yesterday's piece in the Times? What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a hit piece. It was equating what she's and what we're doing to the election deniers.
Well,
There was
agreed,
we did have a good piece in the Daily News at the same time, but that was opposite an editorial giving those quotes from David Patterson and Hazel Dukes and also equating us with the Dominion
Well, I'm glad
election
to see it.
deniers. So it's
Let's
not,
see it.
I don't,
There we go.
I think we're, I don't.
Yes,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
I see the article. It's just, they don't even mention the bill that she was trying to get hasty to pass. She's trying to say, let's pass the Viva NY bill because we're going to have long lines if we have, universal use ballot marking devices, but they just analyzed it as, I don't know, maybe I'm
You know what, Julie?
something positive about it because I'm so depressed about this bill not getting a hearing.
Yeah.
Let's have you and Julie come next week and we can talk about what's going on in New York a little deeper. We'll have you featured. So we can
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we've got to do some more strategizing to
Yeah.
figure out how to
Okay.
save our.
Wendy, now I want to go to Ron Leonard for one more hit with Ron. Go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, I was gonna just mention one thing about the renewables, and I just wanted to kind of briefly give a couple of headlines from the week, just really quickly, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I was just gonna say about the energy thing, like I probably mentioned this before. I'm in a very, very Cuban populated area, and something I just noticed, I noticed all these little like idiosyncrasies that are really cool, actually. Everyone has like little like windmills as like lawn ornaments, like they're everywhere. I'm like starting to take photos of them, and it's like, why aren't these utilized for power? Why isn't this more of a thing? Like, I mean, everybody could have solar and wind in a combination that it's like, yes, it's great to have a grid, but there's just so much that we could be doing that is underutilized, that we're just so used to being oppressed by the monopolies and like the fake representatives that we don't even consider like the most obvious things that could, cost almost nothing and even generate so much. So that's like, yeah, I just see little windmills on everyone's head, on everyone's house all the time. I mean it for everyone in America. So thank you. Huh?
Okay, what else you got? And then we're gonna move on.
Thank you. So one thing related to Assange, there's Henry Kissinger turned 100 this week, and he's comfortable in his home while they found even more war crimes, that he bombed the crap out of lots of people and just did so much more than we even knew. And it just goes to show why we need protected democracy and investigative journalists. And it's really a sin on our culture and our society that we allow this and accept it and continue more war and more risk to nuclear annihilation. Cop City right now, there's a vote to fund it. Mila shared a really good article earlier. We found out last week that the project will cost twice as much in public funding than they had originally claimed, after they told people that there was no vote and funding had already been approved, which was a lie. And then they said it was 30 million. Then it was 60 million. Now it's 67 million. And apparently what the article today says, that they're going to be locked into $1 million a year, over $1 million a year in a lease. And so I was just checking, and there's over 500 people signed up for public comment. They expect the comments to go to 11 o'clock tonight, which started at like 1 this afternoon. If they vote no on funding, then the project stops. But nobody wants this. No one wants this. And I'm just so tired of seeing, even in Florida, everywhere, where representatives get elected as representatives and then think public assets are their gambling chips. And it's really, really disgusting. And the Clean Water Act was gutted this week as well, to show that they say that only connected waterways are protected. So this is like all wetlands or anyone or anything that depends on water is really out of luck. There's a lot more going on in Miami and Florida that maybe we'll get to next week, but just thank you for allowing me to share all that. You guys are all wonderful. Love you all. Thank you.
You know,
Okay, thank
Wendy,
you.
can I just say that, you know, when they talk about connection, they're talking about connectivity at the very top. They're not talking about underground connectivity. So they're excluding all of the other ways that waterways are connected.
Yeah, like aquifers.
So
And, yeah.
So you know, it's it's just an anti-science kind of approach where they're.
Yeah.
But most waterways are connected in other ways than the ways that they're now going to count as connectivity.
You're right. You're right. Surface waters is what they're calling it. So yeah, aquifers.
Surface,
And
exactly, right.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I've heard actually that every drop of water on Earth is connected in a very holistic sense. So bring up a great point. Thank you, Mila.
Yeah, just like mushrooms. Dorothy, and then
Right, yeah.
And there was a violent arrest of the bail people, a group that's been existing pre-Cop City, a violent arrest of this people at this bail fund that was raising money to bail out these domestic terrorists.
Yeah, SWAT teams went to their house and dragged them out. Exactly. And then the protesters that were handing out flyers, just with the names of the police who shot Tortuguita, are still in prison. They were raising bail funds for them. And there are 42 people under domestic terrorism charges. Thank you for that.
One other comment to make, that in a country where Tina Turner dies and Henry Kissinger lives, something is radically wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Ron Leonard, you want to take us out?
Sure. I'd like to take us out with the recognition that we are fighting a PR campaign, and the PR campaign, you know, like we mentioned before, that a few utilities put together a $1.7 million slush fund to get rid of, at least in end result, rooftop solar. We see this PR campaign, whether it's nuclear energy or anything else that is positive for ratepayers, in this case, used to say that somehow this clean energy is hurting, I don't know, poor people or other people who put their money into paying for fossil fuel on the grid. If you look at what I just put into the chat, it was put out by the Energy Information Agency, which is sort of a joke in and of itself. We used to call them the Energy Disinformation Agency, but they've now broken down how much it costs per square foot for energy. And guess what? The poorest of the poor are paying the most per square foot for energy. And that is because they're relying on a poor energy source, which is fossil fuel. We can do better than this. We know better than this. We can produce 100% renewable energy and power the grid, baseload power. And guess what? It's cheaper, it's faster, it's smarter to do. Let's get on with the people's business and do the right thing.
All right, on that note, thank you so much. I guess it's 4:20 or so, appropriately enough, in California. We will be back again next week. We'll do a special segment on New York, and we'll continue to discuss renewables and all that stuff. You're a great group. There's still 40 people on the call, but I'm afraid parting is such sweet.
We instituted stop and frisk in New York thanks to Eric Adams, and there's no rules.
It's unreal. All right, you guys, thank you so much. Another great call. Next week will be 140, and just onward. Thank you, everybody. And no nukes. And John Brakey has an event on Thursday. You can look up the link again. I want to thank again Don Siegelman. It's really amazing to talk. He didn't mention it. He was in prison. He was in prison for 6 years.
Yeah.
6 years.
He was running around California all that time. It was horrific when it happened. It was horrific the whole time he was in there. We were
I'm just glad I believe in karma. I wish I could follow what's going to happen to Karl Rove in his next life.
And don't forget September 9th, Steve's Donziger at my house. Everybody in California.
Yes, Steve Donziger in California, and maybe we can bring Don Siegelman. They'll do a duet. And
Well,
maybe
not enough time. I don't want to undercut.
no, I understand, but maybe Julian Assange will be out by that time, and we can.
Yeah, right. That'll be the
All right,
day.
everybody. Thank you, Steve, for engineering, Wendy, for bringing people in, Mike Hirsch, John Brakey, thanks for being with us, Vinny. It's just been another great session. Thank you so much, everybody. And Steve, you had a hand earlier. Did you want to say something?
Well, many things, but everybody else chimed in. The one thing that they haven't prosecuted are the police that shot Tortuguita with 57 bullets. So let's start prosecuting the right people. Thank you.
That would be a great step forward. Thank you, everybody.